So I think we'll start on time, and we've got a pretty small audience, I think, here from what I can see on the check-in page, the document I'm looking at, which accompanies this session in KikoChat. Is there any housekeeping from the host and co-host on the ESIP side?
No, I mean, everything has been set up. So
okay.
I just do want to announce that this session is being recorded.
Okay, so. Thank you very much. Okay, great.
Yeah, and there's the usual thing about we have a page where people can sign in, so we have a record of who attends, right?
Yeah, I'll share that right now. Get some of this stuff out the way.
And then we're abiding by the participant guidelines and the routine things that people have said. But we have 1 or 2 people on here that are new. So
absolutely. Okay. So we've got 14 participants just now. My name is Lewis McGibney. We've got Gary Bear Cross here as well, are the organisers for the session. Brandon Whitehead, Simon Cox from around the semantic harmonisation, Sweet Ontology, Semantic Technologies community at ESIP. I think there's a couple of names on the call right now who may or may not know, have been even involved in some of these clusters or the Semantic Technologies Committee. But essentially what the session today is covering, and obviously you've seen this on Sked or else you wouldn't have been able to find the hyperlink for today, but basically what we're covering today is a working session for the Suite, Semantic Web for Earth and Environmental Terminology, Ontology Suite, which is under community governance and development within various members of the ESIP community. So what we're doing here, Gary, if you could share your screen, please, and bring up the session agenda, please.
Okay, let me try that.
Yeah.
Oh, I can. Well, I can bring it up a couple of ways. All right. That's it.
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll just go over what we're going to be covering over the next 90 minutes.
This is on the main page for the working session, so so everybody can access it as well as see it here.
Fantastic. Okay. So what we've got is the first part here, which I'm just highlighting just now, is basically an introduction to what's going on. We'll go in and do a Slido poll in a minute once we've got a bit more context. I think that this is slightly out of order here. I don't know what the order changed, but anyway, describe what we're going to do over the next 90 minutes. We're going to really start after this brief introduction with going over to Gary for his position statement really on improving landform representation within Sweet and some other, and potentially Envo environment ontology. After that, we're breaking into 2 parts. So we've got part 1 and we've got part 2. Part 1 focuses on prioritizing Sweet work for the near future. So we're going to have a breakout at that point. We're going to have a vote, a Slido poll at that point in time, for which the hyperlink is here. And we'll do that interactively at that point in time. The Slido poll options have been taken directly from issues tagged with ESIP Winter 2021 in the Sweet issue tracker. At that point, we'll have a breakout. So essentially you vote with your, well, it used to be feet, but you vote with your intention as to what breakout room you want to try and approach. We go off and discuss things for 10 minutes. We come back in, and as a group, we debrief on what happened, share some of the progress which has been made. And really what that is set up to do is to try and guide those of us that are actively involved in developing or discussing or hypothesizing on the GitHub issue tracker for Sweet, is for us to go ahead and prioritize some work in the shorter term. We'll move into part 2 of the session today, which is Sweet community and project governance. And this is an opportunity for folks to speak up about any governance issues that they have with the project. Maybe they've submitted a pull request and it's been sitting for a long time. Maybe they're unsure how to get involved, whatever. So basically what we'll do is we'll go off and there's an opportunity, we'll go off to Slido again, and there's an opportunity for folks to give us an idea about what kind of issues, if any, are affecting them on the project governance side. And then we'll come back. We can either talk in the primary room about this, or we may just on the fly create another breakout room for this. We'll see how that goes if there's more than one issue concerning governance. Regardless of what happens there, we'll come back together and we will conclude part 2 about discussing what progress has been made. And then finally, if Brandon joins us, Brandon's going to give us an update on the recent Sweet survey that went out to many mailing lists within Semantic Web, Semantic Technologies communities across multiple communities. So really, that's what we're going to be covering today. Without further ado, Gary, you've got control, I think. Please take it away. And thanks everybody for attending today.
Let's see if you... Okay, can you see the new screen that I'm showing?
I can't see it yet, Gary, no.
Okay, let me stop sharing and then redo this. Sometimes when I switch, it doesn't, let's see, how about now?
Yes. Fantastic.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Louis, for that introduction and also the opportunity to talk about some of this work. This is some work that's been going on with the two of the people that are now online here, Bob Sinhar from Ohio University and Samantha Arundel from USGS. So we've co-developed some slides and I'll be able to go through this, but the intent is really to have a breakout session to discuss this in more detail later on. So the first slide, starting here, you see a number of things that should be pretty familiar to people, landforms. It ranges from things like objects like mountains to things that are watery like lakes to the idea of a basin that is shown here. There are things that's implied in here that might be part of a larger object. So there's a range of phenomena here that we would think that Sweet would handle, and the question is how it handles it and whether we can improve both the definitions that are involved in this and as well as the organization of the concept. So let's see. Okay. So here's the outline for 7 or 8 minutes of conversation on this to begin with, followed by breakouts. As you can tell from the title, we're proposing that landform is an interesting area for Sweet to consider. In a sense, it builds on the cryo work, and cryo is some of the cryo items are part of landform. So first, we'll go into a little bit about why landforms. Then we'll give some examples of looking at Sweet, some class and subclass issues, what things seem to be in Sweet, and perhaps there are some problems with that. Then we look at a comparison between Sweet and Envo, and one of the reasons for doing that is that the current work on glaciers and cryo, which has been very successful, has done something like that, starting over with Envo and then also aligning with Sweet. So it's relevant to see how the two compare. This time we might be aligning from Sweet to Envo or some mix of that. So again, that's a possible breakout area. The fourth area is just giving some examples of definitional problems. And here we have 3 examples because there's 3 co-authors on the paper. So I'll do one in a sense, so the slides from the others. And then again, those can be conversations in the breakout all. And I'll finish with the idea of what do we do next? What type of activities might we suggest? Okay, so starting with Sweet. What do we see when we go into Sweet and ask about landform? Well, landform is a realm. And then there seems to be like a sub-realm of landforms that you see sort of here. So the things that under the larger concept of landform go from coastal type of landforms to fluvial, to glacial, to volcanic, and so forth. I've shown also what you see when you go to land glacial subcategory. And there you see that some things you expect and some things that we actually saw with the work with the harmonization on the cryosphere, like glacial landforms and rock glaciers and so forth. So some familiar things, it may be not complete, but that's one of the rationales for doing this, is that it follows on to some extent, moving up from glacial landforms to a larger landform idea. Okay. We go into Sweet itself and we actually ask about how is landform conceptualized here? Well, there are four super concepts, but they're superclasses, but they're all related. So we have a land region, land surface, and surface region as the superclasses for landform. But land region, land surface, and surface region are actually listed as equivalents to land. Under landform, we have glacial landform and rock glacier, as I showed before. Not much more of a structure here that is interesting. In other words, it's not very branchy, as shown at least here. All right, let's dive in a little bit deeper. Now, on the right side, we see, starting at the top with an arrow here, we're starting with the concept of land, and landform falls under that. We break landform out into the subcategories. We see a range of things, including aeolian landform, as we saw coastal landform, but we see other things down here. And I've used arrows to indicate some things that are questionable about existing. In other words, the things that are on landform are very mixed. I call them confusion and an issue thing. We have things like landscape and land cover that don't seem to be of the same type of things like glaciers and mountains and basins that we expect. And then we have these categories of study, like orographic and orography underneath there. So it seems like there should be some different type of organization here. Also, there just seem to be many types of things that are not landforms. I'm sorry, that are landforms that are not represented here. Maybe not so surprising, but there may be some important ones. And then a final note here is that abstract spatial regions should not be confused with concrete physical entities. And that occurs, we say that because there are certain things like basin, which sort of fall under a spatial type of concept, as opposed to a physical type of concept. So there are problems every now and then when something is identified one way and it's more of a combination. This slide just sort of indicates why we might be working on landform. There are other things to work on, but I just point out that when you go into BioPortal and you look at the characteristics of the classes in Sweet, well, there's not as many defined as you would hope, to say the least, from the BioPortal view of the one that we were looking at the time. All right, now let me just go quickly to a comparison of Sweet and Envo and how they represent things here. So I'm using basin as an example. On the Sweet side, basin is identified, certainly as part of the planetary realm, it's identified as a hydrosphere feature, a body of water. That seems limited. You can see they've got under the basin, they've got things like channel. That makes sense because it's a depression. On the Envo side is something maybe a little bit more familiar to some people, in that there is a concept of depression of which basin falls into. But notice I have one called structural basin here, but in the upper, beyond that, up on top, there's also a geographic basin. So there's a geological view versus a geographical view of these two things. And that raises some interesting issues. One of the points we'd make about trying to align Sweet and Envo, if you're looking at landforms, with share some terms like surface and solid and liquid that can be used, but Envo contains the idea of a depression, which is a general way of organizing things that we think is useful, that Sweet doesn't have, and we essentially, I think we should add something like that over on the Sweet side. Okay. Now here's another ontology. The ESA folks know about Sweet and they know about Envo largely, but you might not have heard of LFRO. That my two co-workers here, Guav and Samantha, participated in what I used to run as vocabulary development efforts, vocamps, and in part this ontology with other people participating came out of that. And I'm not going to go through that. There may be a little bit more of a discussion later on, but it uses Dulce as the organizer as opposed to the oboe foundry area. But you'll see within it, landform is sort of in the center of this thing, and we have Dave identifying it in terms of its physical characteristics. But there are features like depression and elevation. In other words, the forms that landforms fall into are well defined down here. So it's a nice way of organizing that aspect. It's a little bit more formal and maybe thought out than Envo might have on that, but something that may be incorporated into Sweet too, as well as Envo. Okay, almost near the end here. 3 examples I promised on definitions. Now, I've already mentioned basin. That's a USDA example we'll see in a little while. The second item here on landforms just notes a few things we might discuss in a breakout, but I won't go into them here. Landforms could be submerged and may not be on land. So we have to be careful. If we put landforms on the land, we may, sorry, my door snapped open here. Very windy conditions where I am. Sorry for the interruption. So if you put landforms just on the land, it depends on what we mean by land here. So there are some issues on where we locate landforms. Okay, let me go to plateaus, and I'll give you a little illustration in the next slide about plateaus. This is a good definition as a starting point. They're flat highlands separated from surrounding due to slopes. They're part of an elevated part of the crust. Okay? It all seems to make sense as a starting definition. I should point out that definitions are a little bit hard to find in Sweet, and they seem to be old largely, although the people are updating things now. So this would fit into that effort to update the definition. So let me again contrast the view of where plateau falls into a Sweet versus Envo. Well, in Sweet, as you see in this diagram, hopefully, it's of course on the land. What part of land? A mountain region. It's not a landform. It doesn't, in other words, on the land, there is landform. This doesn't fall under landform on the land. It falls under a mountain region, which is more of a spatial thing. So there's something lacking in this. On the Envo side, it's much better worked and is more of a definition. So Sweet might be improved by taking something from Envo in terms of this definition. Now, here's a slide that Semantic produced. I won't go into it too much detail, but it goes to the idea of how a basin is represented in Sweet. It's good, as you see on the very right-hand side here, where some of the hierarchies are outlined. Under numerical entity, basin is under a depression, and it's considered sort of a numerical entity, actually, a geometrical object. Numerical entity. That's good, except it's hard to define that numerically in some ways. On the other hand, on the Sweet side, it's under hydro. That seems limiting, as we said before. In Envo, valleys should be under depression and not under a geographic basin. That goes back to the geological versus geographic distinctions that get confused every now and then. And finally, Samantha is pointing out that a basin is closed and a valley is not. So there's some aspects, attributes of that you might want to distinguish that might not have been done. Okay, to finish up, again, hopefully this will prepare us for a good breakout discussion session. We think we need a better organization with better subcategories supporting rational hierarchies. I think looking at what Envo has, looking at what Sweet currently has, and looking what LFRO has, some combination of that might produce a more rationalized hierarchy, but it's going to be worked as it was with cryo. We also need better sources for harmonized definitions. A lot of the definitions in Sweet are just too old and haven't been updated. So there's one particular link that's suggested here as a one source, but harmonization, as Ruth pointed out in our harmonization session, is not easy. It takes work, but it's worth it if we do it. Otherwise, we run into more problems later on. So we hope to attract additional expertise to continue to work on this on a regular basis, so having more inputs and continue on working definitions and a better organization. Our characteristics of a better classification would use multiple types of criteria explicitly to create subclasses. So not only form, but origin of some of these things is important to the landform, as well as the material composition. And finally, to finish off, top-level classificatory criteria should be made explicit through abstract classes like elevation. So it's clear what classificatory rationale is being used to define the subclasses. Okay, with that, hopefully you have a good introduction to what the breakout session would be about.
That's excellent, Gary. Really, really good. Thanks for the context. I think that with the chat going on in the with the input in the chat box here, Gary, I think there's going to be quite a few attendees at that breakout. So excellent, thank you. Okay, what we're going to do now is we will jump across to our Slido polls, and I'm going to share the hyperlink in the text box, in the chat box, sorry. So there's the hyperlink, folks, to our first Slido poll. So everybody, if you could please click over there, what you're going to see is a multiple choice question, which asks you which open GitHub issue is most important to you. Okay, what we've got is Sweet subclasses for landform are very mixed. Confusion regarding Sweet landform concepts. There's some relationship between them both, but hopefully Gary's been able to provide some subtle differences in these ones. Initial mapping of Sweet realms to GMCD science keywords. Making small contributions to Sweet. So that's, for example, maybe updating something trivial if you're interested in that type of thing. Using Wikidata or other open knowledge resources to provide definitions for OWL classes. Or the proposal, which has been out for a while, to reimagine Sweet as a compilation of textual definitions. So that's our 6 issues. So please go ahead and vote and see where we get. I'm seeing the answer streaming in just now. Okay, great. Everybody else maybe sees this as well. I don't know whether it's only the person who created that can see what's going on here. But there's quite a few. This is changing, sorry, quite a lot. We seem to have the most popular one just now, reimagining Sweet as a compilation of textual different. That, by the way, it doesn't mean that this is the only thing we're going to discuss. This is just informational. What we're going to do here, and it doesn't look as if it's fluctuating anymore. What we're going to do here is we have breakout rooms established for each one of these 6 issues. It looks like the Sweet subclasses for landform are very mixed. We're not going to use that breakout room by the looks of it. But the other 5 breakout rooms, it looks as if we are certainly going to use them. And at this point in time, what we're going to do is rename your name to the option that you selected in the Slido poll, if you can do that. And how you rename yourself is...
Actually, do you guys have the option to choose a room on your screen to assign yourself?
I don't see that.
Yes, at the bottom of the Zoom, you have the breakout rooms and you can just go into them, right?
Yes.
I think it depends. Yeah. Like some people might and some people might not.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. I can see that, Gary. I didn't know that was a function here. Okay, I'm looking at the desktop application here for Zoom, and along the bottom row, you've got participants, chat, screen share, record, breakout rooms, and it looks as if you can just join any one of those breakout rooms.
And if you can't, just please tell me which one you'd like to join, and I can put you in.
Okay.
Okay. So I cannot see a breakout room.
Okay.
And so I would like to be in the confusion regarding Sweet landform concepts, 234.
Okay, Sweet landform concepts. Okay. Thank you, Gaurav.
I can't see a breakout room, and I'd like to be in the textual definitions. This is Davia.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't see you on the list.
That.
Oh.
I think we might be having a browser versus web problem.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'm fine. It'll be interesting to see the notes.
So if you can go on your own, go. Otherwise, perhaps change your name or say something, and then someone will put you in the room. Is that right?
If they are on the list to be put in, let me see here. Hold on. Yeah, for some reason, some of the people are not. Oh wait. I'm sorry. I found them. Which one would you like to go into?
Reimagining Sweet, was it?
Reimagining Sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There we go. I'm going to jump over there in a second.
You see the join button?
Yeah, I can see it. Is there anybody else having issues here?
This is Sam. I'd like to be in the Sweet Landform Concepts.
Great, okay.
Yeah, so do I, but how do we get there?
Yeah.
Can you also please add Gurav to the Sweet Landform Concepts as well, Patty?
Yeah,
There we go.
yes, there.
Fantastic. Okay, is there anybody else that needs guidance here on switching over to rooms before I do?
Yeah, it doesn't look like I'm allowed to switch myself, but I
Okay.
was trying to go to Reimagine Suite.
Okay.
For anyone listening, one way to check if you have the breakout rooms is to double click on any one of the images of the participants to maximize the screen, and then look on the bottom bar. There should be a mute, start video, and other icons, and there may be one that says breakout rooms, and it's the symbol of 4 squares.
Thanks, Rob.
Simon, did you have a room you wanted to go into?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. Where do they need people?
Doesn't look like there's anybody in subclasses.
Well, I won't go there somewhere by myself.
Okay,
but I'll go
contribution.
somewhere
Okay,
where-
how about Sweet Realms to GCMD?
Oh gosh, no, that I know nothing about.
There's a bunch of people in Landform Concepts.
I can go to Landform Concepts.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Tyler. I wanted to go to the GCMD one.
GCMD, got it. I need to. $27. Hey, Christine.
Yep.
Do you know how to extend the time? Because that took longer than we thought.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I think
Sorry,
we have
me-
about 4.5 minutes left. What do you see on your end?
I don't see the
can't.
option to extend, but it might come up
So
when it gets ready to count down. I'm sorry, Kai, were you
yeah,
wanted
sorry,
to
do you
say
mind? Yeah, do you mind putting me in Reimagine Suite?
Okay. How do we do this? I'm going to resume recording. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, it says they'll close in 30 seconds. So if you can stop it.
I have no option to do anything. It's giving me another minute.
Yeah, I think when they all come back in, we can just say, running a little bit behind
Well, I
schedule.
mean-
You can choose your adventure from here on.
Honestly, they got like 7 minutes
Yeah.
and they only wanted 10, so it'll be fine. Did you screenshot so in case we have to rename
Yep.
them all?
Yeah, I have it.
Oops.
And we're back.
Oh, is that what that's what it was?
Not enough time. We were
We're
just
back.
in our stride.
That was too quick.
Yep, it was very quick. It was very quick.
Do you want me to, I can reopen, I can open them back up again.
Let's do another 5 minutes, I think, guys.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Another 5 minutes, please.
Okay.
All right, so Tyler and Teddy, are you guys able to jump in on your own? Or do you need somebody to put you there? Or sorry, does anybody need to be put in? We're back where
I
they were.
don't see the breakouts right now.
Let's see if it puts you back into the room that you were in.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, join.
Yeah, if I can make a quick suggestion, it might be, oh, that works.
I put in 15 minutes.
Yeah, that should be good.
I think this.
I guess that's a little bit better, but it's really easy to miss that that pop-up showed up.
All right, they're on their final countdown.
Okay. Yeah, we might need to politely remind them of the time.
Okay,
Thanks, Simon. I got it.
Back. Who else felt like an extra 5 minutes was nowhere near what was required? Oh, well, that's part of the fun, I suppose, isn't it? That's part of the fun. Okay, keeps us moving forward. Okay, and okay, so the next part, I think we're down to 15 participants, so we've got the hardcore, contingent here, which is good. So what we're going to do now is skip back over to the session structure, bringing it back in for the next, let's say 10-15 minutes. And I don't know how many breakout rooms there were, but if we could have a debrief from one representative, please, any representative or more than one representative to fill in the gaps that may come out, to just give us a debrief on what was discussed, and if anything came from that. And if nothing came from it, then what's the follow-on work that needs to happen? And also, please let me know if you took notes or not. If you didn't take notes, it's recorded, and it just means I need to go back, listen to the recording and take the notes so that we can take action. So anybody from the first group here, which was initial mapping of Sweet realms to GCMD keywords, did anybody attack that topic? Okay, confusion.
Wait, sorry. What did you say, the GCMD keyword one?
Yes.
Sorry, my sound's cutting out. I apologize. Yeah, so there are a couple of us that had chat about that, and basically just went through the PR and the issues around sort of mapping vocabularies, and also how we might automate that in the future. But it sounds like there's interest, and there's interest on both sides. So it's worth following up at a later date.
Fantastic. And on both sides, you mean on GCMD project as well as on the Sweet project?
Yep.
Okay, great. Fantastic. And again, you know, if there's anything over and above that notes-wise, then we can capture that and maybe augment documentation somewhere, right?
Yep.
What
absolutely.
about making small contributions to Sweet? Did anybody attack that one? Doesn't sound like it. Using Wikidata or other knowledge resources to provide SCOS definitions. Okay. Confusion regarding Sweet landform concepts.
No, I think that was my group, or the group that Simon and Pierre and my coworkers were in.
Okay, great.
Along with Mark. So we had a good representation. A number of things. Mark started off talking about the Nowhere project. We talked a little bit about emergency response related to some of these concepts and social health. So there's some area of possible connection there. We also talked about how USGS considers some of these terms in terms of topo maps. Some of these concepts are relevant there that need to be used. We also mentioned, Simon talked a little bit about work on a hazard ontology. And actually, towards the end of our last 5 minutes there was a lot of links that Simon shared with us in terms of extracting landform concepts from a notable book that he and Pierre at least share. And that seems like an important way to go forward. Pierre pointed out one of the problems that Envo notices with landforms, it is just too many colloquial and scientific uses, so that you have to make some decisions, and perhaps there would be a way of moving forward with making useful decisions for the science and maybe using some related concept equivalences to handle some of the extended, more common sense vocabulary items. So we could have both. I think we were ending up on how we would go forward would depend on what is the reconceptualization of Sweet? What role does this type of work play in how Sweet is conceptualized? Do we leverage Simon and others' work on definitions and start to populate Sweet as just a repository of terms? Or do we try to organize it more systematically, maybe in cooperation with Envo? So there was a lot of thoughts and possibilities for that. Go ahead.
Okay, great, Gary, great. Thank you very much. I do have a question about that very quickly for maybe consideration for Rudy. To what degree does this issue about term definitions or label definitions, you know, what textual definitions, sorry, to what degree does that, the absence of that, block other work going on? Like, really, is Sweet useful without textual definitions? Right? Is that maybe one of the prerequisite questions, the foundational questions that a landform harmonization effort, you know, is that predicated by, you know, the presence of these textual definitions?
That needs a group discussion.
It does need a group discussion, and we are a group.
Yeah.
You want to start it now?
Could you give us a context of why there are no definitions in Sweet?
I put simply, the
history.
Yeah, the author, the very small group of authors just kind of got round to not. I think they were more
They
organized.
spend all their time building the hierarchy and no time adding text. That was all. A huge amount of work by a very small group.
Right, and just relying on Wikipedia at the time for the small amount of definitions they have, I guess.
Yeah, and remember, it's like this is quite a long time ago, and with nowhere near the resourcing that OBO or the biomedical folks had, you know. So it was a real effort and outcome to map out the semantic space, and it hasn't been filled in. But you know, also now so many things have gone on in the meantime. But I think what I really liked about that discussion is that it fits very well with some of the activities we have going on now. If we create a semantic harmonization cluster around landforms, do the semantic heavy lifting in Envo, and then think about that reimagining of Sweet as a link towards that for semantic heavy lifting, but Sweet as a repository of all of the, let's say, more loose textual definitions that are coming from official groups, USGS, the British Geological Survey, others, you know, that could work really well, because then we're filling out that semantic spectrum space with resources that multiple groups can approach depending on their capacities, interests, etc. So I think with a little bit of strategy, and this is that whole serene logic, with a bit of strategy, we can make it all work.
I don't think we're, with that being said, we're not too far away from where we ended up on the final breakout, which was, of course, on reimagining Sweet as a compilation of textual definitions. So, Ruth, do you want to maybe take this one on? Are you able to summarize what we went through?
Right. Well, there were a couple of, this is a discussion that's been going on now for a year, and has some heated discussion associated with it. And a lot of it is related to, you know, are there any semantic, you know, if we use, there seems to be concern that having multiple definitions that are just text, but that allow people to see that, hi, this is a textual definition and it's in this community over here, would actually start to affect axiomization or other developments within Sweet. I think, having listened to Pierre, et cetera, that that's not likely, but the general thought, I believe, is that we should, and I've got to admit that we need to either close to 11, as we're not going to do that, which I don't think there's anybody implicitly completely opposed to. Or the other suggestion was basically that the role of Sweet as a junction for textual definitions, using Simon's third example, his third scenario, role for Sweet as a junction for textual definitions, should be accepted. So in my opinion, at this point, we may not have 100% total agreement, but I really do think that it needs to be closed as, yes, we are going to use Sweet as a junction for textual definitions using scenario 3.
It also came up in the conversation that there is concern about textual definitions and logical definitions. We're not considering logical semantics at this point in time. We're merely talking about dragging Sweet, you know, into a healthier project place that people can utilize things without having to re-ask the question, why does this not have a definition? If we can get over that hurdle, then we can go on and look at logical definition, we can go on and look at more stuff about architecture, we can go on and do other things. But right now, this albatross around our neck as a project community of nothing has a definition here has plagued this project for a long time. I don't really think, I think that the project will eventually die. Sweet will die if we don't probably bring this on board, because, I mean, it doesn't really make much sense to use something if you don't know what it means. You're just kind of imagining that it means this thing.
It also connects to the discussions we've had over several meetings about, you know, where's this all going? As we said, like, Sweet has created a framework for Earth and environment ontologies. You know, it's created, okay, we need one for sensors, we need one for landforms, we need, you know, it's laid it out. It was very visionary in that regard. And what we need to do is fill in that framework. And then we talked about things like Serene, a federation of resources, where, for example, Envo can help with the geological stuff. It's not the only one. There are others which should also be linked through Sweet to say that this is all happening. And like with what Simon has done, and also those links that Simon shared, getting stuff in textbooks or expert groups out of HTML web pages or some paper somewhere into things with IRIs, if Sweet can accommodate that inside it, people don't have to spin up a new solution every time. They could if they have the capacity, but if they don't, like a quick UN working group, we know that we can just add those definitions to the Sweet label so that they can be picked up by other resources. That's one way forward. It's better if they create their own, but sometimes they just don't have time or resources. So that's where I think we can take it forward quite well, and also sort of fulfill the vision, because, you know, Sweet was visionary, and I don't want to see it like disappear in that regard, but it should evolve into something that brings interests together and creates a new community. And I think that would be a good legacy.
Yeah.
And even let's say if you work on landforms, for example, right? I mean, there are some obviously inconsistencies in there, but even if you begin with terms and definitions, that in that process, if somebody wants to improve that a little bit, that should probably also be okay, right? Both birds can be killed with that stone. You know, terms make you think what are these things, and that helps in clarifying even the conceptual structure, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It's important for, I think, for this to be known as well, that this reimagining Sweet as a junction for textual definitions does not mean that no other work can go on. It doesn't mean that no contribution. You're totally right, Gaurav. It doesn't mean that no other work can go on. Anybody can do any work that they want. It's just that this is going to be a persistent theme that we can hopefully bring some automation to as well, and that we can augment. The goal here. The holy grail is for us to augment the 6,500 concepts that are part of the Ontology suite. If we get to that stage, then we can maybe, I don't know, tick this box and say we put a lot of work into that one. We've overwhelmingly addressed that issue, and then we move on to other things. Meanwhile, the landform can continue. The cryospheric alignments can maybe wind down and go into maintenance mode, and other stuff can come along.
Mm-hmm. And that fits also with this whole links to Wikidata and others, right? Because if you're pulling in those definitions, populating it up, you can say, okay, the overall hierarchy structure that we're going to use for Sweet will primarily use Wikidata. You don't need to make it more complicated than that. There can be alternative definitions to show the diversity of opinions on that term, but there's some sort of overarching, simple, easily maintainable structure. And then I would imagine eventually that crossroads would defend or define which group of definitions belong to resources that are thesaurus level, ontology level, just glossary level, so that people can shift gears, so to speak, when they use Sweet. Like, okay, give me links to things that are have axioms so I can compare and reason over them, or I just want to see what the general definitions are. So that would already be an enriching resource that doesn't exist yet, and I think that would be actually something quite novel in semantic web.
Yeah, I agree, Pierre. And you referred to it in our breakout as sort of a broker, an ontology broker. And what immediately came to mind, and this addresses, I think, one of Gaurav's comments as well about being accessible to the layperson, the citizen, is, I've used this example of forest, right? Deforestation is a really big problem. It's all involved with, the sustainability development goals, etc. So, and nevertheless, there are, like, I think somebody identified about a decade ago, 700 definitions of what is a forest. And when you think about how is Envo going to accommodate people annotating to 700, well, this is what Sweet, you find this notion of forest at Sweet, and then individual groups can contribute their versions of hopefully, a full ontology, but potentially just a thesaurus or controlled vocabulary, and register it in Sweet. And so in that sense, it is providing, a nice place to find a basic textual definition, and then brokering you out, as Pierre so nicely just described, to, more thorough or the definition that's really pertinent to your agency or whatever authoritative group you need to annotate to.
Well, here's a question on that. Does schema.org have forest?
No.
What do we do? What do we do if it has some of these concepts?
I mean, I think we just don't worry about it, frankly, because schema.org looks like it's going for keywords. They want to see where the market is, like where the interest is, and they just want search results, right? They're not going to deal with it at this resolution yet.
Schema.org doesn't have forest. They really don't have very many of those kind of specific natural entities. It's very, very generic and also somewhat human oriented.
Yeah, but I could imagine, like, if Sweet is this sort of very broad resource, you could plug in nicely to the sort of vision of schema.org, and maybe we can convince them to do that. If it is a broker, if it has market share, right? That's what they want in terms of definition. Right. So yeah, I remember, Mark, you shared those references with me for forest, and I've been using those in UN talks. We actually tried with some UN groups to look at those definitions, but we couldn't put them in Envo because they're so radically different. Some are clearly lobbyist positions on what a forest should be. Some just differ by thresholds, numerical thresholds, nothing substantive, but thresholds, which were lobbyist positions. So we're not going to have that in Envo. Right? It's just like, it doesn't make sense for an ontology, it will overwhelm us. But Sweet could actually capture that. And then a harmonization activity lay it all out, just and help us, move forward. I think it's cool.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm interrupting. On you go, whoever that was, please.
Yeah, I was just listening to the points that were made. So again, I think an overarching question is about what we want Sweet to look like and what the architecture of Sweet is going to be. And one question, and I don't know if the survey answered it, but one question is, what do users of Sweet, what would they like to see? So if users of Sweet say they need definitions, then that's, that sounds good. But the idea of making Sweet or any ontology simply a junction to bring together definitions from external sources, that's not a typical architecture of an ontology. If other ontologies often or typically include their own definitions, right, there's no reason not to do that for Sweet. And I suspect that was the original intention down the line. So we don't necessarily need to effectively gut Sweet and replace its innards with the resources of others. But at the same time, we could make a plan to develop it if that's what we want to do. So assert local definitions and any other steps for further development down the line. Now that can also go hand in hand as another architecture with mentioning or including definitions from other sources, from other resources. But I don't think just including external sources should do it, because that's not a typical way to develop an ontology. Usually you assert a definition. So this would be something different. Yeah.
And the point here is to just iterate here, Rob. The point here is not that that's everything that's going to ever be done, ever moving forward. This is just an initiative to get textual definitions. I mean, there's no other scalable plan that's been put in place has got us anywhere. It's got this project anywhere in 20 years. Okay, nothing in 20 full years. So this is a plan to deal with the textual definition conundrum.
And is that under the
only not as the extent of the community activity. There's so much that other people want to do. But one of the consistent questions that's come up since I joined, started becoming involved in ESIP is, why the hell is Sweet not get any textual definitions? This is like 4 years ago, and it's still the same to do. So,
and Sweet is it feels like it's a call for those definitions, but we need to pull it at something, because I think, Robert, the innards of Sweet, I wonder what those are at the moment, because right now it's a framework. I see we need to give it the innards, and I think this is one way forward.
And when we were looking at landforms, we feel like the innards are probably need to be completely changed, right? And so it's great at the top level, but when you get into details, probably it's a little bit, it needs revisions everywhere, probably, is my sense.
Mm-hmm. I think
that's really, sorry, this is an aside to the current discussion about definitions. If we don't want to move on, I can table this current comment to later. Was there anything we wanted to add on discussions? Apologies for that. Sorry, on definitions.
So the question of fundamentally developing Sweet itself, right? That can take many forms. So adding definitions from external sources, okay, yeah, that's great, but that seems to, down the line, it just seems to basically be an easy way of saying we're not going to actually put in the time to develop this ontology, basically like most projects do. You start developing an ontology, you have the vocabulary, usually the intention is to create definitions. The history of Sweet was such that it wasn't able to do that. That doesn't mean we just have to, all right, now we're not going to make Sweet definitions. Instead, we're just gonna basically corral every other thing on the block and spit it inside Sweet.
No, that's not what's been proposed. That's not what's been proposed at all. What's been proposed is that we go ahead with trying to harness external community curated definitions, which you can, through a curation process, you know, to add, not any one of these definitions is any more important or authoritative than some other one. So if you were to come up with a definition for something, it just gets added to the collection. So anybody, you know, this is not blocking any other work going on. Okay, guys, what we're going to do. Okay, sorry. I think we'll take a couple more comments and we'll need to move on here.
I just noted, saw something on the chat, which, if I'm interpreting it right, is a little concerning. So seeing it as a staging post for Envo or something is concerning, right? So it shouldn't be, Sweet should not become an advertisement. I said it before, should not become an advertisement to basically for any other project. So if there are vested interests for that intention, they should be stated, but it shouldn't just be it shouldn't just be something that points to others, so that Sweet just becomes you know, it doesn't have its own sort of identity. It doesn't develop itself. It's just pointing to other things, or it's there to bring attention to some other project, to grow another project, or to get other users for another project, that sort of thing.
So Robert, did you actually ever read the thing? Because as you notice, it has 4 definitions for the term sediment soil. And one comes from Wikidata, one comes from the GCMD, one comes from something called GAX, which is apparently something to do with agricultural semantic.
Agriculture.
And then there's something from DBpedia. So this is not talking about Envo only. This is talking about Sweet being able to take create multiple links to multiple definitions from multiple ontologies, from multiple communities, and making it possible to traverse between them so that you can kind of see, well, all right, these agricultural guys, you know, their definition of soil is so different than what the cryospheric people do that, you know, that we probably need to get together if we're going to try and, you know, do some agricultural data in glacial areas like this valley I know about in Alaska. So to me, it has nothing to do with any given other ontology, but the ability to connect to all of them.
And yeah, that sounds great. And if that's the case, then that's a big relief. But from what the architecture that it sounds like, what it sounds like is basically what a portal, like BioPortal, or what some sort of repository. The function of one of those is basically to say, here's a list of resources. This is what this one does. This is what this one is about. And it seems like we're putting that sort of function onto an ontology like Sweet. That's not the typical architecture. That's not the typical purpose of an ontology to do that. You couldn't create a repository online that has all sorts of other resources that basically achieve the same goal, right? So we can take core and we can say,
not. I have been trying for years to get something where I could see all of the definitions that different communities have for a term so that we can have reasonable conversations. I've even had ESIP fund a project to try and get that developed. That all has failed. This is a viable way forward that I can see might actually make my life better.
Just to add one comment to that, one of the interesting bits for me about Sweet is the infrastructure behind it, right? So in just in this session earlier, we were talking about LFTO. It would be fantastic if there were a framework available where people developing research ontologies had a place to integrate them and not have to worry about some of the technical back-end stuff that you might need to prop up if you want to support your own work. And I think this sort of lays out some of the, as you said, Pierre, you see it more as a framework. I think this sort of lays out some of those guiding principles, perhaps. I don't know, where that becomes an issue that or an area where we might see some progress. Does that make sense? Sorry.
So I'll add a thought or two, hopefully not too disruptive. So I'm all for saving Sweet. I think it's an important investment. I can also support importing information, definitions, and so forth from multiple sources, but it shouldn't be a dumping ground. So Sweet sometimes gets described as a framework, but it's a framework that may need to be improved. So it isn't a dumping ground. The realms might need to be improved. One way of doing that is to have some ongoing activity that aligns it with a much more structured, quote unquote, ontology like Envo. That's not exclusive, and it's not making Envo the only game in town. But as we're going along, sort of the alignment sort of improves on the Sweet side, where things belong and how to relate. So people can actually move from a less structured side to a more structured side and see something good about them over time.
I mean, we could imagine Sweet. I mean, I love this idea of having a central place, as Ruth is saying. I have myself wanted to do things like that, and we have to keep blocking our own URIs and do everything manually. And to the extent that there's a central place for comparison, like think of like a stock market comparison page, something like that, where I could look at all the resources, and then at least for landforms, for example, we would work on also providing more structure and ontology, not simply a bunch of terms, at least, but we can refer to that, we can look at all that, what is available, and then use that to inform. If somebody wants to do deeper work, like I would want to do for landforms, then we make that flesh out better. And I know that I have to work with both Envo and Sweet in that process anyways. And Sweet could be that sort of master gateway. Envo exactly isn't designed for that, for landforms at least. But I mean, that's what I would think hope would happen, that I echo the sentiment that it should not be a place to just have a bunch of URIs or IRIs and then nothing actually comes out of Sweet in terms of an ontology, because it should be. But then we need resources. We need people to commit time to developing ontologies. It's not easy to do that.
So I wanted to add one idea of we'd like to talk about the semantic ladder and the hierarchy. Knowledge graphs sort of don't fit any particular place, although they sort of absorb from lots of places. And so I can imagine this Sweet now would have a new place on this ladder, a composite thing, as opposed to it's this or that. It's some type of mix and points to things on the ladder that you can go to.
It could even provide some basic reference ontologies as well for certain domains, and then you can say, what, the more specifics you want, you can go here are the resources. If you want an indigenous view of landforms, go here. If you want a more, geoscientific view, go here. If you want a geology view, you can go here. And that's how I would imagine this could work out.
Yeah, Gary, I agree, Gaurav. And Gary, you earlier kind of analogized it to schema.org. You're saying, well, is forest and schema, and in a way, I think what we're talking about is Sweet being something like a schema.org for scientific terminology. It's got these top level terms that you may be just content with those, but then you can go down to these variations that I think Ruth so nicely described how to do that. I think that'd be a real useful function.
I was mentioning schema.org for a couple of reasons. One is that it was a big part of the earlier day, a discussion of schema.org, and ESIP is sort of making some investments in that. Ruth is prominent in that, as you are. I was trying to think ahead about where things come together or where they come into conflict. ESIP is involved in both of these, and the question is whether this can be a nice leveraging of something together.
Yeah.
And I remember something, I had a session once with Rob Raskin a long time ago, and we were asking him, what is the philosophy of Sweet? And are we and one of the things was Sweet was never supposed to be prescriptive in any way. I mean, it was not supposed to be very hierarchical. The idea was to support whatever you want. If there's a way to represent that, we're not going to say this is it or this is that. So in that sense, I would love the idea of having multiple views, and being supported by one, because there's no other place to do that, actually. Everybody has their own way and say, this is it.
Yeah. Okay, folks, I have posted a link in the chat box, please. This is an ad hoc poll for everybody on the call. We have 15 minus 2 for the ESIP representative. We've got 13 folks on the call. And this is a multiple choice poll, yes, no. We're being in favour of being in favour of supporting proposal number 3 from Sweet as a junction for textual definitions.
Well, this is a bold, simple definition. I guess we're talking about a junction plus now, right?
Junction plus junction. It's outlined. The proposal is outlined on the Wikidata in the GitHub ticket, which was opened in August the 14th, 2020, and it was plenty of input way before that in July and June. So if folks are keen to send in the responses, please do. We'll see where we get from that. Okay, let's move on. Let's not linger on that kind of stuff. I wonder what we want to do with the rest of the session. We had a plan, but I think we've only got 15 minutes left, which is absolutely fine. What I think I would maybe like to do is hand it over to you, Brandon, to talk about the Sweet survey, to give folks an idea about some of the work that's going on behind the scenes here.
Oh, we're at the end already. Yep.
Yeah,
sorry.
15 minutes to go. We didn't, guys, attendees, we did not cover the Sweet governance topic. So we didn't really go on to phase or the second part today, which, to be honest with you, I kind of anticipated, but that's okay. Brandon, do you want to take control here and just give us an overview?
Yeah, I'm just going to walk you through. I'm just going to verbally go through. Okay. I don't really want to share results. And also, since I made the slides last night, we've had some extra replies, so the numbers don't mean anything anymore, which is fine. So I just wanted to, so just for a bit of background, it was brought up earlier in the session that, why are we discussing certain changes? Who's the community? What are the use cases and so forth? And so I thought I'd send out a survey and see if we could maybe get a better idea of who's using it, what kinds of things that aren't in the normal, 8 or 10 people that talk about Sweet in our meetings. What does that community? What kind of opinions or thoughts do they have? And so I went through. If you haven't taken the survey, please do so. I'll post a link later. But just a general rundown. I was interested. So the first question is, what of the semantic resources you use, what do they include? And it has things like dereferenceable URIs, natural language labels, a lot of the things that you would expect to have. And the top candidates for that are dereferenceable URIs, persistent identifiers, and a tie between references, external vocabularies, and hierarchical relationships. I also asked what was important when assessing semantic resources, and by and large, it was the referenceable URIs. Everything else is a not close second. I asked about reusing different resources. I won't get into that, or if you've extended resources, and that I'll let lie until we get the rest of the results in. The resources that are of highest value are interesting. NERC was mentioned several times, the NERC vocabulary server, and Prov, SOSA, those are the ones that are reoccurring, okay? And Envo and QUDT. And I won't get into the tooling, And then, so the first part was more in general about semantic resources and your views and what you find what you find useful. The second couple questions were just more specific to Sweet. So in terms of use of the almost 26 responses, about a third of the people of the responses indicated that they've used Sweet, or they do use Sweet. And they're on the current version. And the range of responses in terms of what could be improved, it's all over the place. We're talking about, obviously there's the definition bit, there's documentation, there's consistent definitions. That's the stuff that's come up more than once. Properties, what are the properties of the classes? Let's see, sorry, there was one other one that I wanted to mention. An established hierarchy. So I think we've touched on all these issues, right? The last one, are there comments that you'd like to share with the community? So in terms of things that other people are interested in, or people that presumably aren't in this meeting would share with us that we might want to take on board as we sort of, plan a roadmap or whatever. So I'll just read a couple of them. Sweet has significant flaws, but it's very useful and should be kept alive. Okay, great. But the other ones that I thought were interesting were, if I use Sweet, or if I map my data onto Sweet, what benefit can I show my clients in 6 months? So that was kind of interesting, which I think touches on the vocabulary issue we were just discussing. And also there's several comments about, I wish I knew, along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, but along the lines of, I wish I knew where Sweet was going, or they're alluding to what the roadmap is. You know, what are we going to work on next? What's going to be built out? That kind of thing. And also, interestingly, there was a lot of responses that said, I don't feel qualified to answer this question or some of these questions, right? Which just for me is interesting. And then, yeah, the rest of it is personal stuff that I won't share. So with that, does that help or hurt, or do you have any questions? I'm happy to look. Like I said, this was meant to be just preliminary. I'd like to leave the survey open for a little while longer and then close it and then write up something for the Semantic Technologies Committee in a bit more detail. Does that seem reasonable to you all? Do you have any questions?
I would like to make a statement here as well. Just a huge thank you to yourself, to Rob, to John Graybiel, and maybe some others that actually assisted Brandon in pulling this together, because it's no mean feat. Everybody thinks that they can word a question differently or more appropriately. Brandon has taken a lot of feedback on this one over 3 months, I think it is. It's been a substantial piece of work to accommodate everybody's views and opinions to what degree is possible, I think. So, a huge gratitude from me in particular, and it's not just for yourself, Brandon, you're leading this one, but from others that reviewed it as well. I think it's really a good piece of community work that hopefully gives us a really good roadmap moving forward. It sounds as if there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of it already, Brandon.
Yeah. Thanks, Lewis. Yeah, it's interesting. Anytime you ask anybody for their opinion, everybody has their own. So it was interesting to sort of cobble together. But yeah, I'm excited to see actually to properly look at these and analyze them and see what the patterns are. So
and it went out quite far and wide, right?
Yeah. So I decided not to send it out to the Semantic Web and Ontology forum, the Semantic Web list on W3C and the Ontology forum, but I sent it to like AG, GU, ESI, the GSA Megan, I believe, sent it to GSA Geoinformatics group. And then there was a host of other, the Australian Linked Data Working Group. There's, I have a list, sorry, I can bring it up. But yeah, I'm guessing, my estimate is it's a couple thousand people that would have at least seen the email, assuming it got through spam filters.
Gary, I wonder if you've got a feeling on sending out to Ontology forum.
Certainly could do that. I wanted to note in quick passing, that we're going to be having this summit year is devoted to sort of alignment and work between domain definitions and ontology. So it's very relevant to this group as well as to the semantic harmonization cluster.
Well, I mean, maybe for consideration. Thanks.
We can certainly put it out as part of that interest in Sweet, as part of that.
Okay, that's food for thought. Thanks, Gary.
Brandon, if you don't have any if you don't have any objection from the time that the three of us were working on the survey, would you mind sending Lewis and myself the results so we can go over it as well?
Yeah, I was going to make them available to, like I said, I'll write it up and make it available. But if you want, you can see the raw results. I'll have to figure out how to do that, but no problem.
Yeah, it was an anonymous questionnaire as well, Brandon, right?
It was an optional. So it was anonymous unless you, sorry, I didn't track anything. So it's anonymous unless you put your name and information in the last question.
Right, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, very good.
Hey, Brandon, in your summary, I didn't catch it. Maybe you mentioned it. Was there a question about asking how people are using Sweet? What they're using it for? And
not Sweet specifically. In the initial questions, I asked effectively what are your use cases for developing semantic resources in general, because I didn't want to get locked into what do you use Sweet for if you don't use Sweet, okay? So yeah, I did ask that question, and there were loads. There's from not building knowledge graphs, spatially enabled environment data. There's a lot of spatially enabled environment data types things in the questions. So yeah, I did ask. So I have a list of potential use cases essentially, which could be useful.
Thanks.
So some good work there, and you know, it's amazing to think really that I think this is probably the first information gathering exercise for Sweet in its 20-year or 21-year history or whatever. So it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out. Pierre has mentioned in the chat, I like the question about return on investment for using and adding things to Sweet, and I think that's a really interesting one as well. You know, I get asked frequently at work, you know, what's the MVP for this thing, right? What's the value proposition for us, and when can we realise that? And it's an interesting one for somebody to pick up a resource like Sweet and say, you know, when would I be able to show something from this? I think that's, yeah, it gives you a different perspective on.
Is simple linear approach to say we could make it as useful for finding things as schema.org, because schema.org doesn't cover some of these things, but people want that.
Yeah, I mean, what in the science on schema.org documentation for repositories and for data sets, it's something measured. I don't think it may be variable measured. You're allowed to enter an array or, you know, a collection of elements there, and we used that field when we did it for physical oceanography data at JPL, and because of what was lacking, well, we just used the Sweet concepts just as a kind of proof of concept for getting something up and running. There's no reason we couldn't have used something else, but we just used the Sweet one. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting one there, Gary. To just have maybe these things pre-canned to say what's the value proposition. Well, building off of schema.org, or certainly science.schema.org, you know, or science on schema.org. These are some of the things that you could immediately implement. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, the way you phrase it, Lewis, because you want to get something up and running fairly quickly. So something with the sort of complexity or, let's say, commitment you'd need to run something like Envo, not yet. You have to do a sort of proof of concept that it's worth it. But if then Sweet links off to resources like that, however many they want, then you've already done half the work of getting there, you know, because you've had some mappings. Some of them could be marked as expert mappings done in the harmonization clusters. And then ESIP is really allowing people to trial stuff, see if it works, and then advance it in whichever direction they choose based on what we broker to through that curation process. So I think that could be a really nice ROI, because then they say, okay, if I use it, then I know if I need to, if I like where it's going and the client wants other stuff, I've already have a pre-vetted link to that other stuff, which saves me a lot of money, or like if I'm thinking from the business side.
Right. Okay, excellent, folks. What we've got here is, before we close up, we've got 30 seconds before we're ready to go. We've got 92% on this poll to 8%. I think what I'm going to do here is, I created the poll, so I'm going to close the poll off and say that we're going to put this issue to bed, I think we'll move.
The poll was not on the agenda, right?
The poll wasn't on the agenda for this meeting, no.
Right. I understand the wish to close it, but if it wasn't on the agenda, it's doing it impromptu like that, I think it's a bit.
Okay, so point taken, Rob. Point taken. No problem. I don't know how to move forward with this one. The goal from today was to.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was going to say. It was the intention to actually try and close all of the issues. I mean, that was the whole point. It's actually written up in the agenda. So the poll may be impromptu, but the desire to close each of these issues was part of the whole intent of this particular session. Therefore, I move that the results of the poll, which have been the same results for the last year now, be held, which is basically 92% of us think that this is a worthwhile thing to do, and 8% of us don't. And this is way for moving forward. I'm in favor of closing this, accepting we are going to use proposal 3 in that issue and call this done. I'm not willing to do this anymore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you're speaking for quite clearly the overwhelming majority of folks here. What I would like to encourage is that if there are any real concerns here, then we append them to the 211 ticket. But that ticket is going to be closed just now, and we're going to move forward with this proposal. It's not to say that that it's blocking anything else from happening. It's just that it's been sitting for way too long for the community to. It's stagnated for way too long. I think.
As you close the ticket, can you point to this discussion, the recording we have of this, so people understand?
Absolutely, I'll make sure all of that stuff's done. I was going to ask before we close off the meeting, can we make sure that the chat box copies into the meeting notes?
Maybe not all those email addresses. Sorry, that was supposed to be informative.
Christine, you captured the chat, because I see they've been put at the bottom of the master page for each session. The chat.
Yeah, I think maybe Patty has been doing that, but that is something that I'm watching for too. We'll make sure we save it all.
Thank you.
And so this is under the, I'm assuming this is under the mutual, how do you say, the mutual understanding and the mutual goal of preserving Sweet as Sweet, and not basically to point to some other one or more other resources purely, and with, positive intention, positive goals of developing Sweet, right? I'm assuming that is the mutual goal of it. That's everyone's goal.
Yeah, it's based entirely on the language and the GitHub issue, and there's no other assumptions that should be made, good or bad, or otherwise, other than what's the text is in that proposal. The text is extremely clear.
I think increasingly we're talking about a semantic ecology of various semantic resources in relation to each other. So that it has value, but it also has sources that's going to take in, and it's going to feed in and align with, and so forth. That's a more complex picture of what Sweet will be.
Ontology ecology, is it?
That's super important. That's super important.
Very good, very good. Okay, nice to finish on a laugh. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending. It's been, I think we've made some progress today. I think we've managed to get real good insight into this whole landform issue, and I think we're realizing how much of a can of worms is about to be opened there. But that's good. There's people interested in moving that forward, and I think we'll get some really good work out of that. So yeah, I think we'll probably reconvene on GitHub moving forward. We'll hopefully see some issues being cleaned up. We didn't get round to governance today, but maybe we could address governance in one of the coming togethers, whether it's over semantic harmonization or whether it's ESIP semantic tech. But whatever that happens, I think we could maybe approach that topic in some point in the near future. Unless there's anything from the co-organisers would like to say just now, I will move to probably conclude the meeting at that point.
I have one question. How, if work on this goes forward, I mean, I'm new to this in some sense. I mean, how do we stay connected? Is it Slack, or how would you recommend that we follow up? And if I want to be involved in this sort of reimagining of Sweet?
That's an excellent question, Gaurav. Thank you for that. So basically, from what I understand, your primary interest is in landform for the time being, but also more generally about Sweet. ESIP maintains a Slack channel.
Okay.
Or a Slack org, I should say. I think it's esipfed.slack.com. And under that, you've got a Sweet Ontology channel. You've also got a semantic-harmonization channel. And your landform stuff may fit in either one of those, depending on whether you're attending a semantic harmonization meeting or whether it's something that you want to embed directly into Sweet. But there's a couple of channels on Slack for that. there's a couple of email lists at ESIP. So for example, you've got ESIP-semantic harmonization at lists.esipfed.org. These are all accessed through esipfed.org website, and you can go into working groups or community, and in there you've got links to the email list. But I think what Gary and the team have set up is cross-posting between both of these. So if you send an email to the list, it's cross-posted to Slack. If you send a message from Slack, it's cross-posted to the email list. So you know, just to try and provide a bit more transparency in the communication, so that folks aren't left out. But okay. I would probably say it would be Slack for just bits and pieces of questions. It's really what I've seen in the email list is the meetings are announced there and then cross-posted over to Slack. But that's basically where you would end up, Gaurav.
Okay, thank you. And I have Gary for help.
Yeah, just drop an email, perhaps, and someone can add you to the ESIP channel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Here, you just DM it to me privately, and I'll do it right now.
Okay. My email is, I'll put it in the chat, I guess.
Pandora's box, yeah.
Might as well. Everybody else's is.
Pandora's box, yeah. Okay.
I said privately, but that's okay.
Oh, I mean, it's fine.
Sam, I'd like to join in on that too.
Yeah, please put it in, and I'll add them to the ESIP Federation right now.
Okay, right, thank you.
I also dropped a direct link if you would like to join the ESIP Slack. It's this Heroku app.
That's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's in the chat, everyone.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Thanks, Christine.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks to our moderators as well, Christine and Patty as well. Appreciated. Okay. I think we're ready to call it quits, folks. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the week and that you've had a nice meeting so far. We're talking to you soon.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lewis.
For sure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
See y'all.